Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Bafun, and this podcast is an extension of my book, also called Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, and poetry on things like fatherhood, identity and belonging, growing up, creativity, and the lessons learned. The purpose of this podcast is to gain insight and learn from the journeys that others have taken. I explore the worlds of art, culture, design, business, creativity, and life from the perspective of Africans who are contributing to the redefinition of the continent and who we are. So welcome. My guest for today is Melusi Tshabalala. I guess an ad man, but primarily, in my mind, an author who has written a couple of really interesting and really diverse books. So I think we'll get into the details of your journey. So welcome, Melusi.
Hey, thank you, my man. Thank you for having me.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Joburg. I was born in Soweto. So I lived there for the first decade and a bit, and then I spent a lot of time in boarding school. But I'm Joburg.
Who are the biggest influences in your life growing up?
Right now?
No, when you're growing up.
Oh, growing up?
Yeah.
Man, to be honest, it was really just the other kids in my neighborhood. And I'll tell you why I say that. In townships, kids grow up with each other. We raise each other, not because our parents are negligent, but because of the spatial planning of apartheid. Your family or your parents wake up at 5, get you ready for school, leave, and you go back to bed, and they only come back in the evening. So you spend a lot of your time with each other, influencing each other. But outside of that, my mother played a huge role in my life, yeah.
So what did you want to be when you grew up, being influenced by all these other kids?
Man, there was definitely a desire for the thug life. There was definitely a desire for gangsterism. But I was always interested in words. So at some point I thought maybe I might become a lawyer because I just wanted to talk and then convince people. And I wanted to be a filmmaker. But yeah, it was around words and stories outside of gangsterism.
And then you ended up in the ad industry as a copywriter.
Yes, I did.
What was the journey, say, from school to ending up at your first job?
Okay,
it was
cool.
Leo Burnett.
It was quite Sorry?
It was Leo Burnett, no?
Yeah, it was at Leo Burnett. It was quite an interesting journey because I think when I was in matric, that's when I started writing. That's when I thought, I can write. I think some teacher told me that I could. And that's the importance of those encouraging words, right? Teachers telling you that you're good at something. So I started writing more. But additionally, my umamkuluami, my mother's older sister, had been working for this family, a white family, for decades. And they were in the film side of advertising. So I spent a lot of time there. So I guess they also had an impact and influenced my life somehow. And so advertising had always been around me because these guys were shooting ads. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, I started writing movies. I remember the first one, the one that I wrote, I was going to submit it into the Mnet New Directions Initiative. I don't know if you remember that thing. I do. So I had written this movie that I was going to submit into Mnet New Directions. But the more I looked into filmmaking, it just seemed like a lot of work, and I was like, no, this is too much work. But then the real thing that happened that really impacted how I ended up in advertising, I think I'd finished matric. Not that I think, I do remember I'd finished matric and I was trying to get a job because my family couldn't afford to pay for my tertiary education. So there's this one day, I'd taken the Star on Wednesdays, like today, on Wednesday, the Star had that insert, the workplace, where they had job advertisements. And I'd taken this one, taken liking to this one ad. I called And they asked me what qualifications I had. I said I didn't have any. I just had matric. And this woman invited me over to her offices, and because she said she wanted to talk to me a bit more. I went over, I think it was somewhere in Glenanda, Joburg South. It's almost 25 years, if not more. So my memory is not so great, but I think it was in Glenanda, Joburg South. And I went to her office. She asked me what I wanted to do. And I didn't really know. I just wanted a job. I just wanted a job at that time. And she got me little bits and pieces, jobs here, there. I remember at some point I was a waiter. And then she said to me, listen, man, it seems like there's more to you than these little jobs that I'm getting you. What is it that you really, really want to do? And with her putting a gun to my head, forcing me to say what it is that I wanted to do, I then said advertising. I knew nothing about advertising. So she said to me, listen, you go to the AAA, apply, and if they accept you, I'll pay for your first year's tuition. And while you're studying, make sure that you try and get yourself a bursary for the rest of the years or the rest of the year. I don't know if it was a 3 or 2 year thing. So I did that. I remember arriving in, Randburg, where the AAA was at the time. And I said to the receptionist or whomever the admissions person there, I said, hey, I would like to get into advertising. And they said, what is it that you want to do? And I said, advertising. They said, yeah, but there are different things that you can do. I said, okay, what do you have on offer? And they said, art direction. I said, what does that involve? And they told me, I said, no, I don't want that. And they went through a list of all the things that one can do, and none of them appealed to me. And she looked at me, I looked at her. I said, is that it? And she said, no, there's also copywriting. And I said, why didn't you tell me about that? And she said, because English is not your first language. I said, I don't understand. Said, no, copy is written in English. She said, no, copy is written in English. I said, okay, just give me a chance. So they gave me something called a copy test, took it home, filled it in, took it back, and they accepted me. Interestingly, though, as I was about to start in this woman, in fact, when I look back, she must have been like 23, which is amazing, right? She ran this placement agency and she was going to hook me up. I mean, I don't know if maybe she had some clients that were going to pay. I don't know. But this young white woman was really going out on a limb for me. And then it turned out that there was a guy who she had just brought on board as a client, and he worked at an ad agency. So when she mentioned him to me, he told her that their company, Leo Bennett, had a bursary scheme. So she then linked me up with the Leo Bennett people. And I remember the day I took a taxi to Leo Bennett. So I took a taxi from home, which was at Malvern, because we had moved from Soweto, lived in Malvern. I took a taxi from Malvern to town, and then I took a taxi to town to Sunninghill. I had never traveled that far in a taxi before. And over and above just the stress of never having traveled that far on a taxi before, I didn't have roll on, and it was a hot day. So what I did is I put soap under my armpits. So the day was hot, my man. So I remember sitting in this taxi, and the taxi just wasn't getting there, and it was hot. I eventually got off in Woodmead because I thought, okay, now I was being kidnapped because I was the only person left in the taxi. But I had seen a sign that said Sunninghill. So I decided, okay, I'm not too far. So I got off the taxi and walked. And then I started sweating, and the soap was foaming in my armpits. It was a complete disaster, man, And I eventually got to Leo Bennett, asked people, and they directed me. And I got there and I interviewed. And so I had never seen myself as a creative person, as an arty person. And they were asking me all these things about creativity and art. Me, I was a Pantsola, my brother, so I didn't know these things. I just thought, what is this bullshit, man? I'm just trying to get a bursary and get an education. They were making me do puzzles and asking me funny things. It was really irritating, but I stuck it out, and I eventually got the bursary, and that is how I ended up in advertising.
So what interests me about your journey is this seeming desire to do things for yourself, right? So, I mean, if one looks at your career trajectory, it's like you go off and you do something on your own, and then you end up back in advertising. And then you go off and you do something on your own while doing advertising. What's the driving force? What has been the driving force behind that?
Phew. For the longest time, my relationship with advertising had been a love-hate one. I think probably at this point in my life, this is the most comfortable I am in advertising. And a love-hate one because you get there and they tell you, oh, it's about self-expression. But it's like, no, it is not. You get a brief and you're supposed to come up with these campaigns and commercials selling these products to people who don't have money so that people with money make more money. So so the first time when I left, it was really that. I remember I was working on a beer brand, and I'd go back home after work and see people drunk and just their lives not going anywhere. And then I'd go back to work and we'd be talking about, having these strategy conversations as if we're selling this noble thing. So I just decided, fuck this, I quit. I left. But another thing that made me quit was how advertising treated our languages versus how it treated. It's better now, but still treats English and Afrikaans. So I left, and that's when I formed a company with DJ Pepsi, and we ran an entertainment company. So there, for me, we still dealt with alcohol companies, but we were not bullshitting anyone saying, "Oh, this is no, whatever." We knew what we were doing. So that's the first time I left. But I keep leaving because I also just feel like with advertising, my creativity is limited to serving corporates versus I feel, we're given the gifts that we're given so that we can make a difference. So the other things that I do for me are quite meaningful. But now I say I am more comfortable in my career because I'm quite senior now. And I'm in a position to decide the kinds of work we do and the kinds of brands that we work on. And the things that I'm working on right now are aligned with who I am and what I believe in.
I think there's a power in that, right? There's a power in being able to get to the position where things are aligned with our values. Because sometimes, I think a lot of times, a lot of us sacrifice or find ourselves in positions where we're sacrificing our values for making a living, for being able to survive, for being able to put food on the table and a roof over their head.
No, I fully agree with you. And, sometimes I wish I didn't have this in me because I would have way more money.
I hear you on that 100%, bro.
I'm like, oh man, this sucks. I look at how I've destabilized my career over the past 20 years because of this burning desire to do things with meaning versus just sticking to a job and moving up the ranks and making money. And so, it really has destabilized my life, but I feel that I'm starting to see the payoff. I am in a comfortable place in my mid-40s. And I think going forward, even people who work with me understand who I am and what I'm about because I've never wavered from it.
What's the transition from like copywriter to creative director? I mean, we always see this creative director sign or job title. But to be honest, I mean, I know for one never really knows what a creative director does.
Okay, so I mean, a copywriter, their primary job is to come up with concepts for campaigns and for campaigns primarily. And a copywriter works with an art director. The director word in art director is not related to position and status. It just means this is the one who influences what the art in the campaign will look like. So he directs the art, right? So they usually work in teams, art director, copywriter, and then sometimes with designers. And I mean, it's become much more fluid with time, but I'm just speaking in the classical sense. That's what a copywriter does. It comes up with his partner, they come up with the ideas, and then the copywriter focuses on the verbal, the words, the copy, crafting that, right? Whereas the art director crafts the visuals, and then they come together as a unit. The creative director starts their career as a copywriter or as an art director, but as and they have a better understanding of what good work is, they then move up to creative director level. And your job is to look at the work that is produced by your teams, copywriters, designers, directors, and say, yes, go in this direction, creative direction. So you give them direction. So they come to you, say, here's what I'm thinking. You can, you look at the brief, you look at the brand, you look at what you're trying to achieve, and you can, now maybe why don't you go this way, or why don't you go that way? Oh yeah, you're doing great, but you can make it better this way and that way. So your job is a managerial job, in that you're starting to help those that work with you sharpen their skills and sharpen their output.
So one of my challenges with, let's say, kind of advertising, marketing, communications, particularly in this country, is a lack of understanding of nuance, particularly when it comes to Black South Africa, which ironically is the majority. How do you navigate that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, Kojo, it is a tricky one. And it's much better now, but here's the reality. And in fact, my first book, Melusi's Everyday Zulu, was as a result of this. And I'll get into that. But, what's tricky is that when you see a campaign, it's not just the ad agency, right, that has say on what that final campaign looks like. It's also ultimately the marketer, right? Mm-hmm. So all those people that are involved, if none of them, or if the majority of them in that value chain do not care about the consumer that they're talking to, then they have no interest in getting that nuance right. Mm. And even if they do care, but they are ignorant, not through their choice, but through how this country was designed and has been operating, then that's when you start having those shortcomings. But even if you are, let's say, a Black creative or a Black account director who, is passionate about getting things right and representing Black people the right way, but your teammates aren't, or your client isn't, eventually you just give up, because at the end of the day, it's just a job. You just go, fuck it. If you don't want cool things, or if you don't want things that work, I'm going to leave you alone. So it's a struggle. And when I say my first book, Melusi's Everyday Zulu, came from that, I think I was freelancing at the time, or I had a small ad agency. And, what's interesting is that you can work at a big ad agency and the clients will love you, and you're doing all this work that's delivering results, that's connecting with the market. But the moment you go and set up your own thing, all of a sudden you're not good enough. They're going to stick to these very same big agencies. Mm. And what happens at these big agencies, as I mentioned a little earlier, so you find that, let's say, the creative team working on a particular product is white, right? Through no fault of theirs, that's just the reality. They are white. And there are certain things that they're not going to get right because they just don't live in that world, right? And so I had written this article. This article that I had written, I directed it straight at marketers and not at ad agencies, because ad agencies can have no interest in changing the status quo if it's working for them. So I've written this article directed at marketers, saying to them, you are failing at your job if you continue to give business to agencies that are not designed to deliver meaningful work to the consumers and people that you are speaking to. The fault lies with you for continuing to give these agencies this work. And the example I made was the process of making a radio ad. So a radio ad, the copywriter will write in English. Primarily, will write an ad in English, a script in English. The creative director will approve it. The client will approve it. Then that ad will get translated into the other languages, including Afrikaans and the rest. Now, back in the day, the first stumbling block that we had was that the translators were not very good, right? So this thing would start going wrong right at translation. But I'm going to be honest, the translators have become much better at what they do, but there's still another problem. So let's say it has been translated well. Now you go into studio to record this thing. You are Gert van der Westhuizen. You record the English, you understand English, and you make sure it's amazing. You record the Afrikaans, that's your home language, you make sure it's amazing. And then when it's time for the other 9 languages, you leave the studio because you don't know those languages. And frankly, you don't care most of the time. So who's left there? The people that are left there are the sound engineer and the language advisor. These people are not invested in this thing, even if they are professionals. The fact that all the agency people have left tells them that no one cares, right? So they're there. Yes, they care because they're doing their job, but the custodians of this project have left. So what then happens is the quality of what you hear on Umhlobo Wenene versus what you hear on Metro FM often differs. And one of the most common ways it differs is if I am a voice artist and I am Umzulu, and you ask me if I also do isiXhosa, I want the money, so I'm going to say yes. Gert doesn't know that I can't do that. So when I'm driving Mina and I'm listening to Ukozi, and I can hear that this ad is not being delivered by Umzulu, and I was making that point. And so speaking about those nuances, or sometimes you write English and you write these puns that don't translate.
Yeah.
If there's no one to check that and say, hold on, this is a problem, In fact, I remember there was a time I was making a point because I was way more rebellious when I was younger than I am now.
I do remember that.
I remember I walked into my boss's office, my creative director's office, and I said to him, he should give me a cut of all the white copywriters' salaries because I stay for all 11 recordings, all 11 language recordings when I'm doing a campaign, whereas Steve leaves and then we have to pay language advisors. I was making a point, just saying I don't understand why I must get paid the same as Steve, whereas Steve costs the company money because somebody has to come in and assist Steve. And in fact, I probably wasn't getting paid as the same as Steve. I was probably getting paid much less than Steve. So anyway, I wrote this article, but then I thought, what? All that's going to happen is I'm just going to upset marketers.
Yeah.
Because now I'm exposing them, I'm putting the blame entirely on them, and no one likes that. No one likes to be called out. So I decided to, let me shelve this article. And that's when I started doing the thing of writing an isiZulu word a day on my Facebook profile, giving its translation or meaning and a story to bring it to life. And that was intended to showcase that there is beauty when you start playing with our languages. And I did this because a lot of the people that not anymore. A lot of the people I was Facebook friends with were in marketing and advertising. And my hope was like, come on, guys, look, our languages are interesting. Let's treat them with a little bit more respect. So yes, your point about the lack of nuance is relevant, but I think it's much less relevant than it used to be when we first started. I mean, I remember when I started in advertising, I worked in an agency of like about 250 people. I don't remember how many we were in the creative department, but there were many of us. And the two most junior people there were the Black people. It was me and my then art director, Uspiwe Nkosi. So the number of Black people has increased within creative departments and throughout the various departments of advertising agencies. And, another good thing is that there are way more senior Black professionals in agencies. So they're starting to influence, or in fact, not starting, they have been influencing that for quite some time. But yes, we still do face those challenges.
Yeah, the funny thing is, so I was asked to do a voiceover in Soweto once. And I've done voiceovers once or twice. And I have friends in that space who, make money and make a decent living. In fact, the studios that I record from is one such person. But, I have friends who made a good living 10 years ago from voiceovers. And I thought, let me give this a try. So somebody asked me, I'd gone in to do something. And they said, we we see you're from Lesotho. Do you speak Sesotho? And I'm like, yeah, I speak Sesotho. I learned it growing up in the space as opposed to studying it at school. And there was only a language advisor there. And her and I started disagreeing in terms of pronunciation, because I was coming from I speak Sesotho from Maseru, from the streets, and she was approaching it from a very academic perspective. And after I did that, I was like, okay, do you know what? Voiceovers are not for me. There's other things that I can do in this world, and that's one of the things that actually drove me away from voiceovers.
Yeah, I mean, when you speak of that, and that was the challenge when I said translations were not really working. When I first got into the industry, it was precisely that. The translators were quite academic about it, not delivering on the essence, but wanting to write Sesotho, or isiZulu. But that has evolved, and also, I mean, there's also a balance, and it's something that I struggle with even now myself. I'm an activist around mother tongues, so I struggle with the balance between, especially when it's written. I still want the language written properly. And somebody's like, oh, but that's not how people speak. I mean, I'm like, no, but you don't do the same with English. When you're writing in English, you write proper English copy. So I would like you to write proper Zulu copy. So, there are those struggles where, yes, this is how people speak day to day, but why are we diluting our languages and we're not doing the same with English and Afrikaans? So those are the conversations that are ongoing, and we keep. I mean, even with my second book, Makenge, We Need to Talk, which is in a combination of English and urban isiZulu. I had this proofreader, an isiZulu proofreader, who wanted, so as much as it's urban isiZulu, I've written it out. I've written out whole words. And she was doing this thing of apostrophes and cutting words. And I was like, do not do that, So in terms of our languages spoken and written, there is that ongoing struggle between the purity and the reality of day-to-day how people speak. But I don't think we should ever mess with how we write it. It's one thing how we speak it, it's a different thing how we write it.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us. So you're talking about everyday Zulu. That it feels like it took on a life of its own. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it, and I think I caught onto it when you started pushing stuff onto Instagram.
Yeah. So it really did take on a life of its own. And it was a funny story. I remember, like I said, I started just writing it to show people that, and even though I wasn't writing in isiZulu, so the only thing that would be isiZulu would be that word and the rest would be in English, but it still was about the essence of isiZulu. And not only was it about the word, but it also gave an insight into how modern day Zulu people live, and not just, in fact, as much as it was about isiZulu, it was just about modern day Black South Africans in our lives.
But also, I believe that when you understand a person's language, you understand their culture, you understand how they think, their perspectives on the world, and that's what it gave.
Yes, definitely. I think it did do that, and so I had written this. I think I'd written a word relating to the coup in Zimbabwe, the coup that never was a coup, the coup that never was.
Yeah.
And so I would do it early in the morning. I would post a word before even I started anything else, and I'd leave it and carry on with my life. So on this day, I'd posted this word. I'd gone to a meeting. I remember the meeting was at Soul City, because Soul City was a client of mine at the time. And when I left the meeting, I looked at my Facebook and I had about 40 friend requests. Now, I was used to getting like 5 friend requests. Now I have 40. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I don't know what's going on. I'm not a sexy young woman, half naked. Why are people trying to be my friend? Didn't make sense. And then I carried on with my day. And I think I had a meeting at DSTV, multi-choice. And when I came out of there, I had about maybe 1,000 friend requests. So I started freaking out, going, well, what has my account been hacked? And then I went in and I looked at these friend requests, and they were mostly middle-aged white women. And I thought, what the fuck is this? And this was around the time when Helen Zille was wilding out on social media, just being racist and, being colonialism apologetic. So I really was wary of white people. And I'd always been wary of white people, And so I looked at this and I thought, man, I don't need this in my life. So I contacted a former boss of mine, who was my former creative director at Leo Bennett. I said to him, hey, man, you're a white guy. You're a middle-aged white guy. What do you think these middle-aged white women want from you? And he said to me, man, just, stop having your back up all the time. Maybe they just want to learn isiZulu. And, I thought, what? That's not what I knew of white people. White people want to learn my language. What the hell is that? And as I was done talking to him, I got an inbox from some white woman saying, oh, thank you so much. Your posts are doing wonderful things. And we learned about them on, I think it's an e-magazine called what's this thing? The Good Things Guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he's got like millions of subscribers. And so he had grabbed one of my posts and shared it on his platform. So that's where I got all these thousands of white people wanting to follow me. So I eventually accepted. By the end of the day, I think I had 2,000 friend requests. I eventually accepted them with the intention of blocking them if they are racist. And to be honest, yes, I've had to block people. It's been 5 years now. I've had to block people, but by and large, it has shocked me. I not only have those people come to learn isiZulu or bits of it, and also learn just about, I also saw a different side to white people. And, it really blew my mind how these silos that we live in really lie to us at times.
I love how you've built it out. So, I mean, you started with that, and what then prompted you to go, okay, let me put it in a book?
To be honest,
as well as the course. Then
I could lie and say I'm this visionary. No, just some publisher came to me and said, put it in a book, and that's what I did. That's what I did. So the book has pieces that I had written, so I just grabbed them off Facebook, but I also wrote other pieces specifically for the book. But I really got an offer, and so I ran with it. Yeah.
And then your next book, Magenga, we need to talk. That feels a lot more deliberate.
Yes. No, that was definitely deliberate. From 2017, I was turning 40 that year. And I just started looking at my life, and it was a mess. It was very messy, So then I had decided to say, fuck it. I am just going to focus on me. In fact, it also had a lot to do with me being able to write so much on social media, writing every day, because I'd started listening to podcasts. I was introspecting. And then at some point I went and saw a counselor, because I was like, I can't continue. I am turning 40 this year. I've fucked around for 20 years from the age of 20. And I live with anxiety. My life is full of drama. I don't want this anymore. I think I can have a different life. I think I can have a better life. So as I was starting to really just focus on Melusi, and in fact, when I then decided to move what eventually became Melusi's Everyday Zulu to have its own page outside of my profile, one of the things I struggled with was calling it Melusi's Everyday Zulu. I had never been comfortable with myself. So naming something after me was quite scary. And not only had I never been comfortable with myself, I had been in businesses where I had business partners. I had a wife. So at that point, I was like, no, but I am also Melusi, independent of being a business partner, independent of being a husband, independent of being a dad, independent of being anything to anyone. And at that point, I was focusing on myself. And I spent most of 2017 and 2018 on that journey. But my friends, my guys were there in weird guy ways, making fun of me sometimes, but they also just were there for me. So as I was starting to feel better, I decided to write a book about the power of friendship, particular male friendship. Right. So I was starting to write this book, a fun book. I don't know how to write serious stuff. I mean, I do know, but I don't like writing serious stuff. And so I was writing this fun book. But then what happened was, because I spend a lot of time on social media, and because Melusi's Everyday Zulu had brought me a lot of women followers. I know earlier I mentioned that the followers that I got were white women, but I got a shitload of women followers. Now, I had never really had a relationship with women as friends. It had just never been that thing. I didn't grow up like that. For me, my relationship with women had always been functional. It's either we're working together, you are my girlfriend or my wife, or we're related. But if just friend, I didn't understand that. But all of a sudden now I had these friends, even though they were virtual. And that exposed me to the struggles that women were facing. And a lot of those struggles had to do with their relationship, with how men treat them. And when I say relationship, I don't mean romantic.
Yeah.
But just, gender relations between men and women. And then I noticed as well that a lot of the guys on social media are extremely defensive because we're taking what women are saying as personal attacks. And because I had started doing the work on myself, I really don't know how, I wasn't taking that stuff personally. I was really looking at this and going, this is fucked up. These people are women, by these people are people like us, and they're crying about how we're treating them. And then I was looking at guys and saying, and guys, by and large, don't mean to be doing this. We have been socialized wrong. There's a lot going on. We're hurting, and a lot of us are taking it out on women. So I started to do a bit more research around that. I started listening more. And so eventually I decided, you know what? One of the things that I'm going to try and do is try and decipher the things that people are trying to say to men. And so I decided to take this book that I was writing about male friendship, keep it about male friendship, but then change the conversations to say, guys, we have some things to talk about. Hence, I called it Makenge, we need to talk.
Yeah.
So I then, in a light-hearted way, the book is just me trying to decipher some of the things that we as men need to look at and relook. But also the bulk of the things in that book apply to human beings across gender and race. But this book is particularly for young Black men in the tone in which I wrote it. So I wrote it as if it's just another guy having a conversation with other guys. But the things that are tackled there are things that all of us need to look at. And, the one theme that I carry through the book is this phrase, if ukazwa masimba uzohlalisa masimbeni. And Kasuthu, I suppose it would be, if ukhatlwa ke masimba utladulela masimbeni. And I was looking at that and the struggles that a lot of guys that I know are facing, and guys in general. Hospitals are full of young men, prisons are full of young men, cemeteries are full of young men. And most of those guys they were impressed by bullshit, and that's where they find themselves. So the book speaks to young men about values, about the things that impress you determine where you end up. But that is a universal truth. It's not just about Black guys, but the book is meant for Black guys because of how I wrote it.
But I think I think it is important to also be directed and deliberate because of the challenges in this country. And what I liked about that book is that, the reality is that for us to start to tackle tackle the environment that we've created for women, it needs us to be able to talk, and it needs us to be able to figure it out. It's not, it's the victim can't fix what sits in the perpetrator's mind, whether it's perspectives or attitudes, or even how one manifests their pain.
Definitely. And I think what I noticed, particularly with the last point that you make, what I noticed on social media is that guys were saying, why are you attacking us? Why are you attacking us? Saying to women. And what I say in the book is exactly what you're saying. You can't expect the victim to then treat you with kid gloves, right? That's not who's going to treat you with kid gloves. So in this book, I say, we as men and those of us who are starting to see the light, I'm not saying I'm the most enlightened.
Yeah.
We need to be having the conversations with each other and with our brothers and nephews who are not seeing things the way they're meant to be seeing them. But we cannot put this burden on women. We cannot do that. And so when they're attacking us, we need to be mature enough, obviously within reason. If anyone is attacking you, they're attacking you. We need to be mature enough to know that this is not about you. If it's not about you, but if it is about you, but these are people who are hurting and we haven't been listening to them for a really long time and now they're pissed off. And so the other thing that I speak about is doing the work on yourself as a man, because you are in an environment now where women are pissed off and they're going to say things that are going to cut deep. And if you're not doing the work on yourself, you're going to react. But it's not only that. There's unemployment, there's rejection, there are all these things where the world feels like it's against you all the time. And a lot of that stuff is not going to change now. The only thing that you can do is to change how you handle all that stuff. And that requires you to do the work on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, whenever the hashtag Men Are Trash raises its head across social media, and a conversation I've had with guys, and there was one of the many tragedies that have happened, and guys were like, but we're not trash, or I'm not trash, right? And I was like, well, while we're debating whether men are trash or whether you personally are trash, women are dying, and so it doesn't balance out. Like in my mind, it's if one person is dealing with kind of a life and death situation, and you're just concerned about language, then there's something fundamentally wrong with how you're viewing the world.
Definitely that, man. And you have to ask yourself why, because these are our sisters. No one in the world loves us more than Black women, right? And so when they're saying men are trash, it hurts, but you have to ask yourself, what is going on? And one of the things that I mention in the book, or how I frame this thing, I say, a lot of the excuses that we as Black men make are not different to what white people say when confronted by Black people. We are making exactly the same excuses when they say, no, it's not me. No, not all white people. And then you say, not all Black men, but you wouldn't accept that from white people. So why do you expect it to be accepted by Black women from you? You are accountable. For instance, if Black women were saying South African Black men are amazing, we would all own it. So when they're saying we're trash, why aren't we owning it?
Yeah.
We would all own it. So let's own the other one as well.
How has doing that internal work, influenced how you parent?
The parenting thing is a tricky one, man. I have 3 kids with 2 ex-wives. That comes with its own challenges. I think, funny enough, I think I'm a better parent now, not just because of the work that I did, but because I'm not with their mothers. I've struggled with women, and I've struggled with romantic relationships with women, and they've always brought out just something miserable in me. So now it's just me and my kids, and I don't remember when my kids saw me upset. but when I was with their mothers, respectively, they would see me upset and they'd see their mothers upset because I would definitely upset their mothers. And so it seems counterintuitive, but I'm a better parent than when I was in marriages and relationships. But the fear that I do have is my children don't see me in romantic relationships. They don't see love in my world. And I wonder what that does to them, or what that tells them, because their moms are in their relationships and then they come visit me. Sometimes I worry that there isn't enough of a feminine touch in my world. I mean, the only woman they interact with here is the helper, the aunt who helps us. But I mean, the work that I've done also touched on my own relationship with my mother, who was my only parent. And it was a tricky relationship in that she loved me very much. She was young when she had me during apartheid. We were poor. She was strict. It was a hard life, full of love, but that love was tough love. And what it did is it made me leave home very early and never visit often, even though I was here in Joburg, working in Joburg, and home was literally a 30-minute drive. I'd only go every other 2 months. And so the one thing that I'm doing for my children is to make sure that they know that this is a place where they can talk to me openly, where they can be honest with me, where they're not scared of me. And obviously, I mean, I'm their parent, I'm their guardian, we still have to respect each other, but I make sure that this is a place where they feel comfortable and safe, and they don't feel the need to run and go build a life elsewhere as soon as they can. So I really try to be a kind and gentle parent. That's how, doing the work and confronting my relationship with my mother has helped me.
I mean, how has not having had a father around kind of impacted on how you show up as a father? I mean, has it?
I really don't know if it has. I mean, I think the one thing it has done, particularly I'll say with my first kid, I think it made it too easy for me to walk away when things were not working with his mother. I didn't really try hard to make him work, because I was like, I grew up without a dad. So if this marriage ends, it's not a big deal. Plus, I'm still in his life, so it's not the end of the world. I suspect if I'd grown up in a home with a mom and a dad, I probably would have tried harder. That said, I mean, I've seen some dads, man. I'm kind of glad I didn't have one. And in fact, I did meet my dad. I think I was about 35. And I remember afterwards, I gave my mother a hug and I said, fuck this guy. Thanks, Ma. So I don't know how it has impacted me. But yeah, I suspect that there are positives and negatives to that one.
So I see that in a weird way, I guess, as an extension or a manifestation of that introspection around your role as a father and your role as a parent. I mean, you recently published a book, Gogo Magic and a Magic Food Truck, as well as now you have an eatery that's for kids.
Yeah, so the idea of the African family-centric eatery came first. So what I'd looked at, and it's something interestingly, about 2 weeks ago, Malaika, I don't know her full name, but she's like a columnist, wrote about that we don't have family-friendly black spaces, right? If I want to eat Kasi food, I can't take my kids with me to those establishments because, one, they are party places, right?
Yeah.
And if they're not party places, they are still not kid-friendly. The kids sit there and get bored. And if I want to take my kids where they will also enjoy themselves, I have to go to a Papacino, Smoke Daddy's, Spur, and I don't like going there. So for me, it was like, and I started talking to other people, and I realized that there is a gap where we have an African-centric place that sells Kasi food, but kids are not a burden. It is kid-centered, family-centered. And so the idea of the eatery came first. And then I already had this food truck. So I decided I'm going to build it around the food truck as a pilot project. But then while I was doing that, I was thinking of writing a children's book. And then I thought, wait a minute, this story of this food truck, and I wanted to honor my mother because our relationship has improved quite drastically. So when it says Gogo Magic and a magic food truck, my mother's name is actually Magic, right? So she is the Gogo Magic with the magic food truck. And that's when I decided to write this book. But the book additionally speaks to the condition that a lot of urban, suburban Black South Africans face, where a lot of people, a lot of kids grow up without their grandmothers because their parents moved from various places across the country to move to big cities to work. So this grandmother tries to close that gap by visiting communities with her magic food truck, being a grandmother to all kids, feeding them, reading them stories, laughing with them. And then I decided that I'm actually going to build a bigger Gogo Magic brand. So I'm trying to get into toys, into kids' clothing. And where that also came from, I was looking at how when you, as a Black person, when you spend your money on your children, 99.999 of that money either goes to white people or Indians. I have nothing against white people or Indians, but we are trying to build our own economy. And the fact that every time I spend money on my children, it goes elsewhere bugs me.
So it goes outside of your community or your tribe in inverted commas, not tribe as an ethnic group.
Yes, definitely, yeah. So that's where the Gogo Magic brand idea. It started with this idea of wanting a place, and I call it an oasis for the African family. And child literacy is very much a key factor in the Gogo Magic brand and the Gogo Magic Eatery. That's why we host a lot of children's book launches. But it's really just about finding a place where people like me who really love Kasi food can hang out with their kids.
Yeah, you don't have to go to some random place for Mogodu Mondays.
Exactly. And and also, I'm done with that life. So it's about that, where you love Mogodu, you love Skop, but you're done with that life, that has come to be associated with those things, where you're just a family man. You're a dad that loves that stuff, or a mom that loves that food, but you can't eat that food with your kids when you're out because there are no places for that.
And when you talk about it and you say it's like, I find in other parts of the world, there is, especially in Europe where I have a bit more experience, but there's a lot of things to do as a family. Whereas when you're in a city like Joburg, you have to go out and hunt for them. And sometimes it's not easy to find the spaces. And like you're saying, a lot of times the spaces aren't, you can relate to the spaces because we all grew up in a Western influenced and urban space. But they're not naturally, they don't feel naturally ours.
No, they're not naturally ours. And for me, always inserting ourselves into spaces that aren't naturally ours also emboldens racists and the like, as if we were chasing after them all the damn time. And it's not that. As if, it emboldens white supremacists because they think, they want to be like us, or they want to be with us. And that's not necessarily the case.
So what else are you doing? You seem to be very busy. like it's a lot.
Look, the thing that I'm busiest with now, I've had the food truck based eatery this is our 4th month. Now I'm embarking on a journey where I'm currently raising funds because I want to really set up a proper establishment. As I said, this was a proof of concept. And over the past few months, I've seen that it really can work. So I'm trying to raise money to set up an establishment. And that establishment, as I said, won't just be an eatery. It would be an emporium for the Black family. Like I said, there will be toys sold, children's clothing, homeware, but also a haven for readers, where there'll be spaces for reading. We'll have authors doing readings for kids and for families. So I just want to really make this Gogo Magic brand something amazing for Black people. And then I'm still in advertising. That's where we started this conversation. I am a partner in an ad agency called Old Friends Young Talent. It's an agency that is headquartered in Cape Town, and I currently head up the Johannesburg office. We are in Kramerville. And then I'm currently writing another children's book. I call it a Maganga We Need to Talk, but for little kids versus for young men. Mm-hmm. So it's talking to young men, to boys, really little boys, just to have them start questioning what we were led to believe a man is and what a cool guy is. So I'm writing a book about that. And then I'm also, with the Gogo Magic and a Magic Food Truck, that was my first foray into fiction. I love fiction. I was just scared to write a fiction book because I never thought I could, but I did it with this little Gogo Magic and a Magic Food Truck. So now I'm writing a fiction novel. Again, but also it's quite similar to the kind of stuff that I write. I don't write romance. I don't write crime fiction. I just write fun stuff.
What's your writing process? Do you have a specific writing process?
So honestly, my process is I write in my head over a long period of time. I write in my head, and then after a couple of months, I sit down and I just pour it all out.
I envy you. I'm in the middle of trying to figure out. I write every day, but I do a lot of corporate writing.
Okay.
But just recently I was just thinking about how, because my book, I wrote it during lockdown. In between dealing with, kids' school and that sort of stuff, and looking for work because, as with many of us, work dried up during lockdown, particularly when you're a freelancer. But I'm sitting now and I'm going, and I was literally just writing an hour a day. I was doing maximum on the book an hour a day. Whereas now, whenever I get an hour, I don't feel like writing, and when I don't have an hour, I keep lamenting the fact that I don't have time to write for myself. But also wanting to do a lot more fiction because, like you, most of my writing has been nonfiction over the years.
Yeah. Look, I envy that you have a kind of system, and I've read a lot of the successful writers. They say they carve out time, that hour, and say every day I dedicate this hour to writing. And I've read about people who say they carve out a space where someone says every month I go away, to a particular hideaway and I write there. I wish I had systems like that. And I think if I had systems like you have, I know you're saying it doesn't always work. I think I'd be much more efficient in everything that I do, but I am quite a haphazard human being.
Well, man, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, my man.
The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is produced by Zebra Culture. If you have ideas of what we can do better, people you'd like us to have a conversation with, or would just like to share a thought, you can email me on info@zebraculture.com. To check out past episodes, go to kojobuffer.com/podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, Listen to Your Footsteps, check out kojobuffer.com/book. There are details on the various spaces it's available at. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review or comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, there's the Zebra Culture by Kojo Buffer newsletter, where on a weekly basis, I share a curated list of articles, playlists, videos, etc. that have caught my attention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.